All right, well, good evening, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you again for joining our special meeting for the Commission on Sustainability this evening to discuss the study and report bill focused on urban metals. And thank you, Councilman Conway, for joining us for the special Commission on Sustainability meeting this evening as well. So to start, we're going to get into some updates from the Office of Sustainability. We want to thank everyone again who joined us last week for our monthly meeting. I'm going to share my screen. All right, so again, welcome. We're going to start with some updates from the office. Thanks, everyone. We had a great turnout to last week's meeting, which is our general September 2020 or September 2024 commission meeting. And we continued our focus on energy and the economy issues. And so we appreciate folks coming out for that meeting last week and that ability to partner with the state Department of Environment and Maryland Energy Administration for that. And I think anyone that was there, you heard us welcome our two new climate core fellows. So we were able to bring on two Maryland Climate Core fellows working in partnership with the Maryland Department of Service and Civic Innovation, Kayla Abrams and DeAndre Hawkins. So we're gonna get into roll call for the commission, and I'll pass it to Mia and Jared for that portion. Mia or Jared, did you want to, I think are you both on mute? Did either of you want to do the roll call? Do you want me to do that?
Yep, I can do the roll call. So
Okay.
I was just looking at the lobby, giving folks a second if there's anybody in the lobby waiting to get let in. We're good. Yeah, Lisa said she was going to leave and come back to the meeting. Let's see. Give folks just another second. I'm having some computer issues myself here. Can everyone hear me? Just maybe thumbs up in the lobby or.
Hear you. Yep.
Yeah, okay. All right. All right, so I'll start with the roll call. Mia Blum.
Present.
I'm Jared Lyles. I'm present. Regina Boyce. Donzel Brown. Phil Costa. Gary Crum. I see actually Donzel in the lobby here. Donzel Brown.
I'm sorry, could you hear me? I said present.
Okay, all right. I might be having some technical difficulties here. Again, I apologize. Don't see Phil in the lobby. Okay. Lisa Pareto.
I'm here.
You're there. Okay. Morgan Grove.
Present.
Phil Joyner. Earl Johnson. Nicolette Lewis Saint.
Present.
All right. Councilwoman Porter. Inez Robb. Brian Smith. Stephanie Smith. And Ben Zychek. All right. And
For doing. Okay, thank you, Jared, for doing roll call. And as a reminder to everyone, our next Commission on Sustainability meeting will take place Wednesday, October 16th from 4 to 6 p.m. And that will be a virtual meeting. Beginning in October of this year, we'll be focusing on climate action planning for the last 3 meetings of 2024. All right, so next we'll jump into the City Council Bill 240507, focused on urban meadows. And so I will go ahead and pass things to you, Councilman Conway, to provide a high-level overview to the commissioners about the bill. And then we can share what the Office of Sustainability has in our bill report and go into open discussion. So Councilman Conway, please take it away.
Wonderful. Thank you for pulling together a special meeting to talk about this bill. It's one I'm especially excited about because I think it's really, really important for us to think about how we are managing land across the city and what opportunities exist in those current management practices. So once again, my name is Councilman Conway, and this bill is, first I'll tell you a little bit about how I got to pulling together this bill. We on the council have budget meetings year in, year out. And one of the things we talk about a lot is mowing across the city. How much the city spends to mow various properties across the city, how much it costs to mow, and how complicated mowing is across the city. And, this is an issue that I think a few of my colleagues have brought up time and time again. And I've certainly brought up by myself. It's really difficult to get a sense of what we're mowing, why we're mowing it, and if there are other opportunities on the table. And thinking about that, I was kind of digging into the idea. It really sort of begged the question for me, do we have to mow in all of these situations? And even more, if we chose not to mow, would it actually be a net benefit to the city? One, from a cost perspective, and eventually from a maintenance perspective. And this is where the idea of urban meadows comes into play. One of the other things we also talk about a lot is some of the environmental impacts across the city that we see and opportunities that we see from vacant lots and stuff like that. We have a number of programs that are geared toward turning over these lots and otherwise towards communities so that they can make healthy green space, pollinator space, and otherwise that bring other environmental benefits to the city. So the idea here was to do a study in the report looking at this concept and thinking about it from a broad perspective, looking at it across the city, trying to understand what the costs and benefits of an effort like that would look like. What does it cost us? Right now, we don't know what it costs us to mow. We have no less than 5 separate agencies doing mowing across the city. We know what that costs, but we haven't actually pulled that all together. We also don't have a strong understanding of what it would look like if we did do a meadow. I would imagine, at least initially, it takes more maintenance, but over time, we would see that maintenance need significantly decline and almost be essentially nothing. So in thinking about these components, really want to understand the cost and benefit of looking at our mowed areas and thinking about maybe not mowing them and instead planting sustainable grasses and otherwise and native plants in order to reduce the need for mowing and also provide some of those environmental benefits, ecosystem benefits, shade, heat retention, stormwater retention, and otherwise things that we know that the city desperately needs. So there's a couple things that the bill asks for. One, that cost benefit analysis, initially looking at the concept of 100 acres. This is something that I've gotten some feedback on and have already started to think about different ways to structure that 100-acre goal. But I don't want folks to get confused by the 100 acres. Once again, this is a study and report. We're not saying that we need to do this tomorrow or begin implementing 100 acres across the city. But as a thought exercise and an understanding of the cost benefit, I think it is understandable to want to understand what this looks like in a bigger scale. Taking a look at existing lots, medians, any sort of mode areas across the city that the city currently maintains, and looking at those for opportunities to turn into urban meadows. And then really beginning to think about the logistical changes that would need to happen in order to consider a policy like this, should we want to delve a little deeper and actually implement it as a pilot. So thinking about the various agencies that come into play, what this might mean to their operations, what special skills or abilities would they need, and then finally an environmental assessment of the impact of implementing something like this. Thinking about stormwater, thinking about heat, thinking about water retention, thinking about pollinators, thinking about green space in communities that currently do not have any green space, and what benefits we might expect from implementing a policy like this. So I think it's a pretty straightforward bill. Really trying to get to the bottom, I think, of a lot of the work that this commission does. And I'm really hoping that you guys will look forward to supporting it.
Thanks, Councilman Conway. Really appreciate it. Jared, I'm just kind of jumped in here just to make sure that you had enough time to come off mic to answer any questions. You're still muted.
Yep, I just wanted to thank the councilman and next go into, I know we had sent a list of questions that we developed as a council that we had about the bill itself. And some of those you have answered, but wanted to see if you had any responses to those questions, and then open up the floor to the commissioners who are here to see if they had any follow-on questions.
Yeah, and I can, if you'd like, I could go down and answer some of those questions one by one. Let me see if I have the actual list of questions. Forgive me, I have my list of answers, but I don't have the list of questions. So it wouldn't help to kind of line it up together. Give me 1 second. I'm going to see if I can find
Amy, do we have the questions?
Yeah, I
You
was
can
gonna pull
drop
that
them
up.
in the chat. Okay.
Yeah, Ava, I have them in the slides. I just popped them in. They're the last 3 slides before the very last slide. So
Okay.
Oh, here, I've got it. I've got it right here. All right. Let me get it open. And forgive me if I'm looking back and forth between screens. So the first question was, will the study only identify city-owned properties? Excuse me. Actually, general comment. So the first general comment is to please more clearly define urban meadows for the purpose of this bill. A definition could reference the sustainability plan, case studies, or any document that better defines these spaces for a layperson. The way I tend to think of urban meadows are self-sustaining communities of native grasses or plants in urban areas that replace packed dirt or lots or paved areas with natural ecosystems. So ways that we can sort of echo ecosystem services that might have naturally been there had we not, developed the land previously. The next question, and if you guys have any questions, please just jump in. If those answers are not sufficient or you'd like me to further elaborate, just let me know. The next question was, will the study only identify city-owned properties? And no, I sort of envision this study as encapsulating both city-owned and privately owned properties, whereas the city is currently engaged in maintenance. So we currently maintain a lot of lots across the city. DPW does vacant lots or lots that are technically owned by someone else, but we still take on the maintenance responsibilities. And I would, if I had my way, I would probably prioritize areas where we have contiguous landscape or, proximity to parks or open space or multiple vacant lots that are next to each other as a way to provide some contiguous land together. But no, this would be, I think, an exercise that would look at pretty much anything that is maintained by the city. And I think there's also a possibility to think about partnerships with properties that are not maintained by the city. Once again, the initial idea of this bill sort of spawned from the idea that we're spending, millions and millions and millions of dollars to maintain land by mowing it, in which case it may not need to be mowed. The next question is, will the study identify other types of properties besides vacant lots? And absolutely yes. I alluded to opportunities to look at any large lots. These don't necessarily have to be vacant lots. They may be properties that the city uses every day, but may have large grassy knolls in front of a building for which we can consider managing those landscapes differently. I would say we definitely want to think about how that landscape looks and how it is managed. You might want to make sure you maintain a level of sight or other considerations. And so I think the type of species that you use in those different scenarios, you would probably think about it a little bit differently. But it does not need to be just vacant lots. I would see grass medians, the right of way between sidewalks and the curb. Those are also, I think, opportunities for us to think about meadows of sorts as opposed to regularly mowed grass.
Yeah, commissioners with questions, I guess, of their own. I just quickly say if there are follow-up questions, so one of the questions immediately answered, would you be comfortable taking those?
I can take them as we go through the questions. If folks would like me to clarify, it's probably easier that way.
All right, perfect. Yeah, I saw Morgan Grove, and I also saw a hand before that. I'm not sure who that person was.
I think it was Nicolette. So Nicolette and Morgan.
Nicolette, you had a question?
Yes, sorry, it took a second to come off mute. So I wanted to understand if I understand the cost of mowing, but what the cost of implementing the urban meadows would be. And also, Councilman, as you were describing the vacant lots, this is a follow-up question. I wondered if there was any discussion of what it would take to transform those spaces, if there was a different plan for any of those lots in future plans. Would there be some additional consideration or potential cost associated with that transformation?
So I'll try to answer your first question. I think is pretty straightforward. I think that's one of the major questions of doing the study and report, because of course I think you're going to have some maintenance on the front end, some additional maintenance that may be a little bit more difficult, at least initially, just to plant the seeds and get things to propagate to the point where they're self-sustaining. So I think at least initially it's going to be a little more work to actually get these things planted. It is outside of DPW and DOT and DGS's typical operations to do these kinds of things. And so I think it'll be a little bit different for any of our agencies should agencies do it. I do think there are also opportunities for us to work with nonprofit partners and community partners for which those instances may be easier because they're a little more nimble, but they may not be able to handle quite as much land. We have the Adopt a Lot program and other programs that do similar things already. But the cost of it, I think, is the cost of implementation and eventually maintenance. I think at least initially, I would expect that, because you're changing the use of that land, we mow and we mow and we mow. We're very good at doing that. So to change that, I think is going to initially, I think, be a little bit more costly. I just don't know how much, and I hope that this study would help us identify that as we roll it out over time. And then your second question, can you remind me?
I wanted to understand if this is a part of the study or if there's been consideration of what happens for the vacant lots, if there is a different plan for the property. So what the cost or the burden of transforming that would be if there's a future plan to use the vacant lot.
So you mean in an instance where we might want to develop that lot later, maybe put a building there or something?
Correct.
Yeah. And so my hope is that this can serve hopefully in multiple scenarios. And I think maybe the study can identify this as well. If the upfront cost is too expensive to justify, a scenario in which we turn over that lot within a year or 2 years, maybe that's not a good candidate to turn that into an urban meadow. But if we don't have a plan for that lot, and that lot has been vacant for 15 years, and we've got many that have been vacant for 30 years now, I think it would certainly make sense for us to, put as little money into that lot over the next 5 years until we figure out how to get some real investment there. So I think, this is an opportunity depending on the upfront costs and the long-term costs for us to think about. Should we roll out something like this? So I think that's an excellent question. My hope is that, we're not necessarily rewilding land. That's not necessarily what this is for. There may be instances in which we want to do that, but that's not necessarily what this would seek to accomplish. Does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you.
Yes. And I think Morgan, you had a question too.
Yeah, and this may be a suggestion posed as a question. It seems to me that what you're raising is the question of how much money the city is spending on mowing grass. And so, but the meadow proposition is focused on vacant lots, but at the same time, you seem to be invoking, or the bill invokes, other areas where the city cuts grass, which could be parks, it could be all sorts of other land use types. And so you're asking kind of a management question of, should we be mowing all this grass? And, and what alternatives there may be. And so just perhaps to consider that an exclusive sort of reference to vacant lots may not be actually what you're chasing after, but really you're chasing after mowing grass. And so just to, you could start with vacant lots, but some of the examples that you're giving are not vacant lots. And so maybe that's the question is, are there the study might consider looking at alternatives to mowing grass, meadows being one of them, and also it's not restricted to vacant lots. Just a thought.
That is a great suggestion. Yes. Yeah, and the bill, as it's drafted, it specifically calls out vacant lots and existing areas with packed dirt. But yeah, I could certainly see how one might think squarely on vacant lots and packed dirt vacant lots as what this is targeting. I think this has an ability to be a resource in much more than that. So I think it's an excellent point. Thank you, Morgan. All right, I'll keep going through the questions, and feel free to stop me. I'm not looking at this screen, so if someone does have a question, please just let me know. So how would the study select or prioritize lots or sites? I think I sort of would leave that up to the study. I don't know the answer to that question. I think that's part of the reason why a map that sort of looks at lots in existing areas, potential medians and otherwise, that would be a good fit. I would leave that up to the folks doing the study. I think there are a lot of opportunities to kind of look at this as a management practice for the city. But it may not be the answer for everything. So Yeah, I think I think we probably if we had to prioritize, and now mind you, this is not we're not we're not asking for this in the bill, but if we were implementing something like this, and I wanted to prioritize where we would implement urban meadows as a management strategy, I might want to look at testing certain areas. I would probably want to start with a handful of large properties to kind of see some of the large stormwater and pollinator impacts that we'll see in that area, and think about its impact on heat and other things like that in a larger area. And then I would also want to begin to think about some of the smaller areas that are just going to be very different and going to have very different impacts, and what we can learn from studying those areas to determine whether or not it's worthwhile exploring in other areas. But I think if I had to prioritize different areas in order to see different scenarios in which this could be employed, a large open lot, a grass median, a grass strip between the sidewalk and the curb. I think I want to see different scenarios and see how they play out from a management perspective, from a logistics perspective, from a cost perspective, and also from an impact perspective. Being that, the idea is right now we're currently mowing all those things, and we want to look at the cost benefit as well. So. The next question is, how will the study identify how these projects would be funded? I think there's probably a number of ways to look at this. Oh, yes, and certainly Morgan said a public acceptance perspective. That is certainly an important one. I think the aesthetics of urban meadows may or may not be appropriate in some of these situations, and you won't know until you kind of try it out. So that's a really good point. Thank you, Morgan. So in determining how to fund it, so there's currently a number of philanthropic efforts, and certainly Chesapeake Bay-wide efforts that are geared toward addressing stormwater, addressing heat, addressing water flow. So there are, even funding that comes from the city specifically to address these issues that go directly in line with our sustainability plan. So, some of that is managed by the Chesapeake Bay Trust, and I think certainly they'd be interested in certain projects that would be considered on a small scale or even a larger scale that they could help to fund or scope out. But yeah, I think there's plenty of funding out there. I think we'd have to kind of make the case, and I certainly think the study could look at something like that. Who might be interested in funding stuff like this? But I don't think there's any necessarily shortage of funding to get something like this off the ground. The scale may be the real question. If we're looking at something like 100 acres, that's a lot of land and a lot of maintenance, and so that begins to be a totally different way that the city looks at managing these spaces and if it makes sense or not. For testing some of these spots, I think we can certainly find funders. They're out there. Who should be legally responsible for the upkeep of these spaces? So I would imagine right now, whoever is already legally responsible. So for the private properties that the city is going onto those properties and mowing because they have a vacant building notice or otherwise, they are technically the legal responsibility of the owner, and they are fined every time the city has to go and mow on that property, and they would still then be responsible legally for anything that happens on their property. For city properties, we are already responsible for those properties, and we would continue to be responsible for those properties, so that wouldn't necessarily change. I think there is an opportunity in some instances for the city to like the Adopt a Lot program and otherwise, where the city has transferred responsibility or maintenance responsibilities to communities and other community organizations that we can certainly consider. That might make this answer a little bit more convoluted and complicated, but I think largely the legal responsibility will stand with the owner of the property. Is my thought right now. Well, the study identified challenges to creating and maintaining urban meadows, and yes, that is 100% the hope. I think this is a good idea in my head, but the reality of actually doing it is always more difficult. And I think until you test this on a small scale and learn some of the pitfalls of an address like this, you're never really going to be able to knowledgeably say whether or not it's pursuing on a much larger scale. But I do think there is a lot to learn in the thought exercise of understanding if we change the way we did this work, what does it take? What does it take by way of training? What does it take by way of time? What does it take by way of tools and materials and otherwise? So I think, there's a lot to learn here. And the hope is that the study will help to at least uncover some of those components. And I think until we start doing things like this more often, or in instances where we're already doing it but have not necessarily looked at it in this way, we're not really quantifying those pieces. And so it's hard for us to say how beneficial this would be at a larger scale. Can a workforce development component or educational component, including students or youth workers, be added? Someone was reading my mind. I think absolutely. Absolutely. I think, as much as possible, if we're able to build skill sets in our young people, in our workforce to do this work and to do so knowledgeably and confidently, I think, there's also an ability for this to transfer into other work. So, yes, I think there's a workforce development component, and I would hope that if we were doing that component, we would work with some of our nonprofit partners that do a lot of work in this space. Baltimore Tree Trust comes to mind. Literally, I started the program there, and they do a lot of great work training folks in tree care and landscaping. Blue Water Baltimore does some work as well. So I think there are certainly opportunities for folks to learn about this space as an opportunity for a career. And testing out some of this stuff, I think, is certainly a way to do so. And I saw there was a comment. I didn't get a chance to read it as I was talking. Ben said, sorry if I missed this as I joined late, but will there be funding for an engagement process in the study, for example, to ensure that diverse perspectives inform the scope of the cost-benefit analysis? So in passing a bill like this, hopefully it passes, I don't determine the funding. I don't have that ability. Maybe there's something that I can advocate for in the next budget, but we'd have to work with the administration to find funding to do something like that. I certainly think it'd be really, really, really helpful, especially because what I often find is that certain communities around the city don't have the green space that we would like them to have. And certainly this provides some of the benefits of green space that those communities need. And I think those perspectives would be really, really helpful because I think there's going to be a lot of nuance. We don't want to put the wrong plants or the wrong urban meadows in an area thinking that we're helping, and we may actually be causing more problems if the weeds are too high or something like that. So certainly we'd want that feedback, and I think that'd be really helpful should we test it out in an area. But once again, this is a study and report. This study and report does not necessitate that we actually implement this work. I do want to spur some thought on this issue so that some of this work does happen. So the study and report can certainly happen with all the research that currently exists and the current knowledge about how city processes work and the current operations within each of our major mowing agencies like DOT, DPW, DGS, and otherwise. But it does not this bill does not necessitate that anyone do this work yet. Does that answer your question? Yes. Thank you, Ben. And see if I missed anything else. Okay. What effect would work by yes. What effect would work done by students or other non-employees have on the implementation budget? I think that is my guess, and this is simply a guess. My guess is that it would reduce the budget if we could get students or volunteers to pitch in toward these efforts. For instance, if a school adopted the green space in front or around their school and piloted that way, Certainly that would reduce the need for, contractors to go out and mow those areas. But, I think it depends. I think it depends on, how much additional maintenance and how much additional skills and otherwise. I would say likely it would be cheaper with additional volunteers to get it done. Next question is, could the bill identify specific cost benefit metrics to study, such as the financial costs and savings, community impact, environmental impact, safety, aesthetics, biodiversity, urban heat island effects or mitigation, and legal implications? And this is listed in a far more cohesive and cogent way than I could have put it in a bill. So yes, and thank you. I'm going to steal this. Will the bill compare the costs and benefits of urban meadows with other types of plantings, such as lawns, gardens, forests, and etc.? But the hope is yes. I think going back to the question that someone asked earlier about whether or not implementing urban meadows might necessitate not developing that land later, I do think that there may be instances in which we may want to consider that, but I would certainly leave that up to planning and think about more comprehensively whether or not that makes sense. Certainly, we don't want checkered pocket parts or other, like that may not be our answer, but there may be instances in which we can strategically target certain areas for more long-term greening. That said, I think that the whole point here is to compare it to cost benefit, and certainly, as lawns now, that is our current standard. We know what that costs. We pay for it every year. The idea of strategically planting grasses that sort of meet the standard, or planting native plants that sort of meet a standard to be a meadow. That's exactly what we want to see. I would assume that between lawns, gardens, and forests, that forests require the least amount of maintenance. And Morgan, if I'm wrong, you tell me. I would imagine that urban meadows probably require the second least amount of maintenance. I would imagine, at least initially, when you transition from a lawn to an urban meadow, or to a dirt patch to an urban meadow, that does take more effort and more careful sort of cultivation. But within a year or two, you would imagine that you wouldn't have to do all that much more. Lawns are predictable. We know that we have to mow them weekly during the summer, and we know what that costs. We know that cost will eventually go up over time, but we know it is predictable. And gardens are pretty labor intensive and need regular hands-on maintenance. So I would say that's probably the most intensive work that you can do. And then the last two questions. One is, how will the study be funded? My hope is that the city would fund the study and manage the funding of the study. And then who would staff the study? I believe, of course, this makes sense for sustainability to staff the study here. You've got the most expertise on this issue in the Office of Sustainability. So if there's anything else, I see there's some chats that came in while I was talking. Morgan said, following on Ben's question, the study may need to consider a maintenance budget for sustaining communications and engagement over time, meaning that engagement and feedback occurs beyond the initial conversation. And I would agree. I think, this would be certainly in some communities more than others, a pretty significant transition of land use and look and aesthetics and expectation. So I think, like I said, I think once again, certainly from the physical maintenance of the plants and the grass in the ground is going to be certainly more work, at least initially. And I think also in managing the relationships with the communities in which you would employ this effort. But I would imagine over time, as folks, one, get used to it, and two, you've got more sustainable plants, that you don't have to do quite as much physical maintenance, nor do you have to do as much maintenance of expectations of communities. that was a lot. So if there's any other questions, any concerns, I'd love to hear it. I know you guys deal with these issues all the time.
Donzel has a question.
Yes, thank you, Councilman Conway, for bringing this to the commission. I had a question and a comment. Have you looked at the federal funding that the U.S. Forestry Department is providing through the federal grants that are coming through the city? And those grants include workforce development and community outreach around. So both the Department of Forestry and the EPA, we are currently in Zone 3, and there's a lot of money available. There's a, and if you want to talk offline, I think U.S. Forestry who are really looking to come into Baltimore City because they have not done much things in Baltimore City, and they want to increase their portfolio on working here. And they have a pretty ambitious new person there at U.S. Forestry and District 3 that would love to support something like this. And I would think that they would additionally have funding and additionally have resources to actually conduct the study. So I was wondering, is there a particular entity that you would like to conduct the study, an independent contractor? How would this study be put out? Would it be RFP? That type of thing.
That's excellent. Thank you for the suggestion. And that's a good point, which I hadn't thought about. I don't know if this would qualify for the Forest Service funding, but it's certainly worth asking. And I also think, and it's not covered within the initial scope of the bill, and shame on me being a tree guy, but trees. I think there are certainly opportunities where we have lots that, you know, to my point earlier, and the question earlier about whether or not we want to sort of rewild those areas and expand parks, or, you know, permanently plant trees with the hopes of making that, you know, usable space or open space instead. I think trees would certainly be on the table and hugely advocated for by me. And I think in those cases, the Forest Service funding would certainly fall into play. I don't know if the Forest Service would fund a meadow, but it's certainly worth asking about. And then you had another question, Donzel. What was the second question?
Yeah, I was wondering if you had reached out to them, because I know that they want to do workforce development in Baltimore City around responsible maintaining of lands. So it's not necessarily trees, but things like you mentioned, like urban meadows, is part of their agenda.
That's great. I didn't know that. Yeah, no, that's something we can certainly look into, and I would hope that we can use that funding to learn on a broader scale. And I also, you know, there are currently efforts like this already happening in different capacities where folks are investing in community gardens or, you know, doing things like this, and we just don't really keep track of it or think about it as a potential for a broader effort. And so, you know, I think there's something that we can learn from those efforts as well. But definitely, if there is Forest Service funding out there to get this done, I would definitely be interested in working with partners to get some of that funding to see some pilots played out. Thank you for the suggestion.
I just have a quick commentary here. We've been joined by commissioners, so Bryant Smith, Phil Costa, and I think that might be it.
Great.
So thank you. Are there any
Um,
questions from commissioners? Morgan's
Yeah,
here.
So I'm speaking as a not a USDA Forest Service employee at the moment. As you're looking at alternative things to mowing, one of the things that you may want to take a look at is that the USDA Forest Service has now hired a staff person who focuses on urban tree nurseries. And so, and in case you're not aware, there's a famous urban tree nursery in Mexico City that's also a national forest. And so it is both a park and a tree nursery at the same time. And so the idea could be that your tree nurseries aren't just in rows, but have benches and things like that. So as you think about alternative things to mowing, you could solve several things at the same time, because what's being found that with the tree nursery work is that landscape architects are the largest purchaser of trees, and they don't really care what cities think in terms of what they want, because they're just such a small percentage of the solution, the demand. And so maybe cities need to come up with their own way to get the trees that they want.
Very interesting thought.
Just to put that out there.
And I appreciate that sort of approach addresses two issues at once. Yeah. I see a couple of thoughts in the chat. And Lisa was saying that the cost benefit analysis could also include the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions of reduced mowing over time. And certainly that is a really important one. We have set net zero greenhouse gas goals for 2040 as a city. And with that, knowing that a huge part of our operations requires that we use equipment that right now is not electric. And I don't really know if there is any electric options for mowing at the scale that we mow at yearly. So that's a great question or a great suggestion that we can keep in mind. A point from Aaron is, does or can the study differentiate between meadows and no mow zones? Or does the bill not include no mow zones at all? Both for ecological benefits and public perception, it's important to compare apples to apples. So the bill does not talk about no mow zones specifically, but I do think it's something to keep in mind here. We didn't ask for that in the bill. I think once again, the bill is a study and report. But I do think if we were to explore this as an opportunity for an ordinance for management in certain areas of the city, that would certainly be something that we would look at. And my hope is that this bill might inform us on what that decision would result in. If we said that we did not want to mow in a certain area, what might we expect by way of additional maintenance and ways to reduce maintenance in those areas if we made that decision? So that's an excellent question, and I think it gets to the heart of what a study like this might help us think about for the future. Ava has dropped the forestry grants. Thank you, Ava. And thank you, Morgan, for dropping the tree nursery public park.
Dunzo,
Any other
did you
thoughts? Yeah.
Another question, Dunzo?
Oh,
Your hand
sorry.
is still raised.
Sorry. I did have another question. I wanted to ask, who would you imagine conducting the study and report? Is this something that is on the burden of or the responsibility of the planning department? Is this an independent contractor? Is this, another agency who is responsible for putting this report together? Because as you mentioned, with the mowing programs, that we currently have, there's 4 or 5 agencies responsible for different parts of mowing. And is that going to be consolidated? And who's responsible for consolidating that data from those agencies and communities, and who is going to be conducting the
Yeah, so I would imagine the Office of Sustainability overseeing that responsibility, given the Office of Sustainability has got probably the best expertise on this issue and familiarity with what we're trying to accomplish here. I totally would understand if the Office of Sustainability doesn't have the time nor expertise to sort out each agency and the science behind stormwater and heat and so on and so forth in order to pull together a comprehensive report that would answer all the questions here. But I do think, there's certainly, I think, a world in which we can get an expert to pull together this report, some contractor of some sort. But I would defer Ava, how you think would be what do you think would be the best way for us to get a helpful study report on this?
So in our bill report from the Office of Sustainability, we kind of really suggest any study and report related to urban meadows or any greening efforts across the city be conducted within the context of our existing plans and as well as our existing climate goals. And so thank you for that segue, Councilman Conway, because I did want to share with the commission to inform any vote that the commissioners will have to take on this particular legislation this evening, kind of what's in our bill report. We start just defining the what an urban meadow is per USDA's definition. And then again, we suggest that that this analysis would really be done with the understanding that in the city, we have a couple of plans that outline a vision for expanding green space and access to green space to our residents across the city, including the Green Network Plan that was released in 2018, the Baltimore Sustainability Plan, which has several chapters related to greening the city, including people and nature, nature for nature's sake, green infrastructure, and others. And then also, based on public feedback and input, we included a nature-based solutions section in the 2024 Climate Action Plan. And we have mitigation strategies related to natural systems in our 2023 Disaster Preparedness Plan. And so in terms of the resources and exactly how any such study or report would be conducted, we would have to assess the kind of like degree or the level of detail in any particular report that would be necessary in order to adequately address the question and support the overall vision that I think that the legislation is trying to get at, to really assess like what those costs would be or what the staff capacity and or need would be in order to fulfill this particular study requirement.
Yeah, I thank you. I agree with you on that.
All right. So I will stop sharing. And again, thank you so much, Councilman Conway, for speaking with the commissioners this evening. I think I'll pass it back to Jared and Mia to lead the commissioners or facilitate a discussion and vote in terms of where the commission stands on this particular matter.
All right, well, if there are no more questions while we have the councilman here, just, I guess, give all the commissioners just a last chance to ask any questions. And then we can move into, and we'll yield some of your evening back to you, Councilman Conway. Thanks again for coming and joining us. And then we'll have a discussion and then take a vote. No more questions? Going once, going twice? All right. All right. Thanks again, Councilman Conway. And yeah, we'll have a discussion. And then take a vote. I believe we have enough folks for quorum with the folks have joined. We do have a number that's dialed in. I just wanted to see, I'm sorry, maybe that number is not there anymore. Okay. Okay. Does anyone have any comments, concerns about, I guess, the bill itself before we go back and provide a recommendation? I think, Amy, you have a list of outcomes that we could have from this vote at this meeting. If you mind reading those.
Sure. So with bill reports, and my example that I'm familiar with is the Planning Commission. They typically some of the recommendations that come from a commission include recommending approval with amendments, or recommending disapproval. Another alternative would be just deferring to the Office of Sustainability's bill report.
Amy, has the Office of Sustainability already finished their report yet?
Yes, that when Ava was sharing her screen, that was the Office of Sustainability's
Oh,
bill,
gotcha, sorry.
which comes from Ava.
Thank you.
And that recommendation was, I think, a recommendation for approval.
With all of the questions that were asked here today that we got some clarification on, it sounds like some of this content could be helpful for consideration when a report is pulled together, or as it comes together a little bit more. Is that something that commissioners would find helpful? Because otherwise the bill kind of stands as it was when we received it in April.
Morgan, I see your hand. And we'll get you two done, so.
Yeah, what's being asked is an extremely difficult study to do. And I wonder whether or not the Office of Sustainability is able to say, like, I'm just curious about your range of options. Can you say, yes, we're in support of this, but show me the money? Without the resources sufficient to do this kind of work and consider a huge number of variables, I think it's going to be really hard. Just frankly.
I think I agree with Morgan. I respect Councilman Conway's attempt to make this happen, but I think it's a little bit half-baked, in the sense of actually completing the study and doing the report. I think it will just float somewhere and not have any teeth to it. I mean, that's just my sense. And we don't know the funding, we don't know the scope, we don't know any implementation. And I would love to have the study done. I absolutely support the idea of doing it. But who's going to do it and when it's going to be done? Was kind of like not really clear to me. That's me personally.
Ava, were you going to say something, or can I?
Oh, go ahead, Lisa.
Yeah, Lisa, do you have a?
Well, to me, I read this. This is all it is a bill to get the feasibility study. This isn't a bill that's supposed to figure out how it's supposed to be funded and how it's supposed to work and how it's supposed to be implemented. To me, this is the first step. And maybe I'm not understanding the entire process, but to me, it's okay that we don't have it figured out. Say the study says, like, yeah, we should do this, then now figure out the funding. This is a step to get some really smart people in the room, like Morgan, I'm looking at you, even though you don't have your camera on. People like you to volunteer to be on this committee
to help figure out where the sticking points are. And other smart people that can put links to, oh, look at all this funding, and then other smart people to say, hey, look at all these workforce development options. This meeting was great to me because, and I think a couple of you guys mentioned it in the chat and in the notes, previously, we didn't know the whole thing stemmed from mowing, right? And to me, that's the first step. We need to rethink what we're doing in the city, and then what is a better way to do it. So if we don't approve this bill, we're not moving forward in this, in my opinion. I would be in support of it, if I can be the first to throw that out there. And understanding there are still lots of things to figure out.
If I'm hearing everyone correctly, so from what I've heard from folks so far, is that some folks in the room generally support the bill, but have, I think there's some issues which are not 100% clear, and there's opportunities for the bill as is to be clear in both scope and scale. But there's general support for the bill at large in the room, not to put any words in anyone's mouth, but personally, I feel like there could be more detail, especially with regard to scope and scale of what's covered in the bill, and not necessarily talk about where funding might come from necessarily, but say the scope of the bill will cover this small thing either as a pilot program or a limited scope, and then be scaled up from there. I just wanted to hear what people thought about those options to vote on specifically. So acceptance or non-acceptance, or potentially acceptance with comments. And I think we've provided some really good feedback to the councilman tonight as well. I see some more hands. I want to recognize those, but and just moving forward in directions we can vote as a council. Those are mine. I see. I'm not sure if Nicolette, your hand was up first, or Ben check, but whomever it was, just feel free to speak up.
I don't know about first. I had a process question. First is, if we're supportive of the bill, do we have to support it as currently written? Because I think some of the pieces that I'm hearing are potential modifications. So I just wanted to know in process, if we say we're supportive, does that mean that those revisions or recommendations don't have to be taken?
We can support with amendments and list out all of the questions that we've had here for consideration
Okay.
and inclusion.
Okay. And my second question, based on this conversation and pulling back up the bill and really getting to reflecting on what Morgan has shared, my concern is that this is written as a bill in urban meadows, but what we heard, and to Lisa's point, is this is really about alternatives, sustainable alternatives to mowing. And so if we're going to recommend that that feasibility study be done, I do think there's a difference in those two scopes. And so I think that's a fairly significant recommendation to say we're suggesting that that scope be a pivot to sustainable alternatives to mowing. So I want to pause there because I do have another thought, but I did want to try to understand, based on this conversation, how we would grapple with that change of scope or recommendation, because that's the thing that seems to continue to come up.
I believe, Amy, you mentioned the one of the choices was approval with amendments or recommendations.
Yes, sometimes city agencies with their bill reports will offer amendments. The Planning Commission at times has offered amendments when they've done recommended approval with amendments.
But so I work in the federal space, and it's one thing to amend like a section or language. It's another thing to amend a scope of a bill entirely, which is why I was trying to flag that, because it's almost a rewrite if we change the scope.
Just generally getting a feel for the room here. I think that we're hearing that major changes are, well, generally in support of the bill. It's thinking that the changes that are needed are so drastic that maybe even not supporting the bill or having renaming the bill as a comment. I think that personally, I did learn a lot tonight in thinking of this in terms of a resource allotment study as opposed to just an urban study, urban meadow study. Generally change my opinion not on whether it's needed or not, but changed my opinion on how this would be gone about into bringing it into law and legislation and the impact that it would have, and really changing the resources that are used and how they are used does seem different than just a bill to have more green space, let's say. So I think it's a more purposeful real study to be done. And the language around that is significantly different from as the bill stands.
We make a suggestion to make those, we can make a recommendation to make the changes that are necessary to fit the scope of what we believe is necessary for the legislation. Hopefully that made sense and that someone was following. But because we need to make a decision this evening, and it sounds as though we are in support of this bill in concept and recommend several changes based on what information was provided, some of the other conversation that came, we would just have to make sure that all of that is captured in the documentation that we provide as the bill report. We've been referred this bill as a commission. We don't often get bills referred to us, so we do need to make a decision.
Yeah.
And Lisa, you have your hand up.
One thing I noted is, it's in the bill, in the first paragraph, it says areas of low maintenance and self-sustaining native plant communities, and then in parentheses, otherwise known as urban meadows. Okay, and then in the 4 bullet points, it just says urban meadows. So could one amendment just be, right? I mean, maybe the bill was written like, I'll just say urban meadows to mean this thing, when it feels like all of us are saying like, just say the thing instead of narrowing it down to urban meadows. So could the suggestion be in the 4 bullet points where it's a urban meadows, so some other phrase, low maintenance, alternative, vegetative area. Amy, I don't want you to capture that wording because I don't think that's right. I'm just brainstorming.
Lisa, to go with your brainstorm, I think that we have a definition of urban meadow that is in the report that Ava, are you able to share your screen and just go to that definition? And then potentially we can take this definition here and add onto it, some sort of a sustainable alternative landscape or something that kind of captures the doesn't limit us, but allows us to capture the spirit of the legislation. Would that be acceptable?
Two thoughts. One, did you guys send this and did I miss this document? Or is this?
This was not sent. This was,
Okay.
no.
So this
Because
is
I know
the
what-
office's report.
Right,
So the
because one of the
office-
options is we can approve as the city sustainability department. So that's not even really an option for us if we can't review this. So that's maybe here or there. So I think it's fine to use whatever definition you did, but to the point of, we don't want this specifically just to say urban meadows, right? We want it to look the report is about looking at alternative, of which one option might be urban meadows.
So we can use the definition that has been provided by the office in their bill report and add on to that, or any other sustainable or alternative landscape solution. Does
I
that
can-
capture?
Sorry.
Nicolette and Lisa, does that capture what we're, all of the options that we're trying to capture?
I think it can. I'm trying, in the interest of helping Amy, I'm trying to think about what exactly that edit would be. I think it's something like installing and maintaining 100 acres of, I'm thinking of urban meadows as defined by, and we can put that definition, or other alternatives. Again, like this is getting to the mowing piece, right? To use of vacant lots in existing areas. So I think it's still in that like for the purpose piece, which then allows you to then in part A, I don't think you would actually have to change it because you reference the sustainability department definition. And in B3, I think you would just need to put quotations around urban meadows.
If I may, I think that perhaps, following what Nicolette and others have said, you could say urban meadows are defined as, they can be used as an alternative to mowing, land management practices that include mowing. And then add that in addition to looking at meadows, I guess part of your feedback would be to look at other land management practices that include meadows but are not limited to meadows as alternatives to mowing.
I think the only thing, Morgan, there is that working in the existing definition might be helpful to us.
Oh yeah,
Right.
I would use that definition but say that, and then add to that definition that it can be used as an alternative to mowing. That you have a land management practice which is mowing.
And maybe we can add it in the analysis portion.
I want to recognize Ben Zychek's hand as well. It's been up.
Great, thank you. I didn't want to interrupt this discussion. I totally agree with what's been said and appreciate the creativity to try to figure out how we can support this with some alternative phrasing. My question, we can table it if we want to continue with this discussion, but really is about this process, which, I brought up in the chat, and I think several people have asked about, which is that there's no request for funding in here for the report. And it sounds like, well, there just can't be, because that's not the job of the city council to do so. But for those who work for the city, is there any precedent we can look at here? Like, what ends up happening? Is there a risk that we get the office stuck without resources to do this right? Are there points of success we can point to that would suggest that we will be resourced, or the office will be resourced to get the right expertise on this? Because regardless of how good the bill is, if it's going to put the office in a position where it can't do the work right, then I'd be worried about it.
Thanks, Ben.
Yeah, and yes, thanks, Ben, for that question. I think when the question came up earlier, it really is a matter of oftentimes if we don't have the resources to do a report that meets the expectations of whether it's the analysis or having the data or their staff capacity to do that, sometimes those efforts can just be on hold until we do get access to those resources. In this particular situation, I think you scale the report to the resources that we do have available and accessible. And so if you can have a report that's really robust and comprehensive and kind of like how Morgan detailed, or you can have something that's a little bit more streamlined. And I think in this case, we would have to have something that's a little bit more concise and very focused, given the staff capacity and limitations.
All right. I don't see any other hands up. So to go piggyback on that, Ava, is there a way that even perhaps we could, it seems like we're moving toward a vote with, except with amendments, but to modify the scope of this with the councilman so we can have a scope that we can reasonably attain. So just saying that we're going to focus on this certain amount of area. And the definition that we've come up with is take some known mode parcel of land or vacant lot, assess what the maintenance budget of that is annually or what have you, and then assess the impact both financially and then from an urban heat island and let's say water resource management effect of a certain amount of area which we can actually perform a study on and have a quantifiable measurement and then scale that up from there. Is that something that I guess we could recommend, and that would put the scope in something that's tangible, meaningful, and then we can scale?
Yeah, if the commission, I think one of the way to move forward with that would be kind of to vote collectively on those amendments to make sure everyone's in agreement. And so, Amy, I don't know if you've been jotting those notes down, but it sounds like there are 3 amendments that are brewing. One is to change the overall scope to acknowledge the fact that part of this, what this bill is trying to achieve is accomplishing a management issue when it comes to having spaces that are easier to manage, whether or not that's meaning not having to be mowed or what have you. The second is to include a very clear definition of what it is that we mean when urban meadows is said, in comparison to other open spaces or green spaces, whatever terminology you want to use. And then third is to kind of like broaden the scope to include other co-benefits and some consideration for the cost of these interventions. And I don't know that if that doesn't capture everything, but then we want to make sure we get everything in there. But does that accurate, or is anything missing from that?
I think that I heard that there was more consideration. So the funding consideration, the size of the lot, so maybe, up to 100 acres. I think we also heard that we need to be in alignment with the existing plans, so that we're not creating something that is outside of existing scope while honoring the fact that it is trying to create something new, and to make it manageable for being able to be funded if there's a source of funding that comes at some point, or there's some options. So I heard that it needs to be all of the questions that we asked, in addition to the feedback that the office has given, and changing the scope initially so that it is more than just an urban meadow if there's another alternative, sustainable alternative that fits the application better. That's what I think I heard.
So,
all right, and so because this particular hearing is coming up on Wednesday, we wanted to leave this meeting tonight with a clear sense of a draft language that we can put into a draft. So I want to pass it, back because we do have to have the commissioners do a vote on this. But I guess we maybe, is it helpful for us to put in the chat the specific amendments and that language that will go into that bill report? Would that be helpful for folks to make sure everyone is clear on what they're voting on?
yeah,
Okay.
I think that will be good. And sounds like we for sure are moving toward the vote to support, but with amendments, and then we can whittle down the wording of those over the next few minutes, I guess. Look at it in the chat, or either do that in the follow-up. I guess we have till Wednesday, so we are kind of time constrained.
Unfortunately, we don't have until Wednesday because the bill
We need it
report
now,
is due now. So we have to
Okay.
take the
All
vote
right.
now so that it can be written up to be submitted and reviewed prior to the hearing. That's the fun part about all of this. So I apologize.
Sure.
So
Okay.
Amy.
So I was going to suggest if we could maybe move towards and have commission members make a motion of, like, we've kind of listed some different amendments that people want to have considered. I could write in the chat, but I also don't want to put words in the mouth of the commission as far as what your amendments are. I don't know if a commission member would want to put in the chat an amendment for everybody to consider. I can list out in the chat the different kind of topics for amendments, and then we can move through and vote one-on-one on those different topic areas that were discussed for amendments, and vote one at a time on, do we want to broaden the scope? Do we want to have it include funding sources? Do we want to change the area, or kind of whichever points you want to vote on?
I have a question on process. Is there an opportunity for us to approve and provide notes? I'm sorry. I'm thinking provide notes on the final bill for them to consider, or is this the final vote?
So it's either, this is the bill, so either support,
Okay.
unfavorable, so favorable, unfavorable, or support with amendments. It sounds like this commission has a lot of amendments.
But my question is processes, do the amendments have to come tonight, or the amendments have to come?
It
Or
may
can
be
the amendments
To
To
be
be
able
considered.
to vote on them, you need to have enough commission members present at the same time to be able to take an action to vote.
okay, listen.
And as far as I can tell, unless it's changed since I last looked at the list of people present, we do have a quorum. Last I looked.
And I think, Donzel, if I'm understanding, maybe some aspects of your question relate more to the actual process of the legislation itself. We do have MLGR on the line, but the hearing for this particular bill is coming up Wednesday. And then I think for it to actually pass, Nina, correct me if I'm wrong, there'll have to be 2 additional hearings, and then it would, actually, I don't want to misspeak on the legislative process itself, but.
Sure. Sorry. So yeah, Nina Themelis from the Mayor's Office of Government Relations. So the hearing that'll be taking place on Wednesday is the initial hearing for the bill, where all committees will report out. The sponsor will speak toward the actual text of the legislation, as well as any additional amendments that he has developed since introduction. There is no requirement that a certain number of hearings be held in committee. But what I would assume, given the conversation here today and the previous brief conversation with the sponsor, is that the likelihood would be that there would be a future voting session in between the hearing Wednesday and that voting session. There would likely be additional communication in order to finalize the package of amendments, but that would be incorporated into the final bill. And then the committee would vote on the amendments either one by one or as a package. And once it has been voted favorably by the committee, it would go to the next city council meeting to be voted upon by the entire council. And that will be on second reader. And then it will go for final passage at the next council meeting following that. So there are a few different opportunities for amendments to be worked on. I think most notably all of the feedback that's provided from agencies and this commission in advance of and during the hearing on Wednesday, but then again between that hearing and when a final package of amendments is developed.
If I may, I'd like to just give you a little bit of context about why I'm so worried about that planning would have enough money to do the study. So, and now it's going to sound like tell me the story again, old man. In 1992, I worked with the Department of Recreation and Parks to install meadows in a number of the major parks. They were well maintained, and there was a lot of community opposition. And the quote in the Baltimore Sun by Mayor Schmoke was, "I'm tired of those parks looking like Don King's hair." And they sent DPW in and mowed them all down. So it, while there's lots of ecological considerations, it can become political and can put elected officials at risk. So that's why, I'm kind of cautious about just making sure that whoever's doing the analysis on this is sufficiently resourced to be able to look at it from all perspectives and how it may play out. And that's the cost benefit analysis in this. That's the scars on my back to just share about why I am so cautious about that one consideration. I don't want anyone to get set up.
I think it's a very valid. Yeah.
Sorry, isn't this just a bill to do the report? This is not a bill saying that that it's going to be implemented. And if one of the amendments is to include one of the things that you said, what is that public perception fund, then wouldn't that concern be covered in the report as part of the cost benefit analysis?
Yes, my point would be that there's sufficient funds to do the study to consider those things, right? It's just making sure that there's enough resources to do a comprehensive study. And someone's getting so the planning's not getting stuck with either an unfunded mandate or an insufficiently funded mandate to do this. That I'm speaking now, just making sure that the bill would essentially say that sufficient funds would go to planning to do the study, or resources. Doesn't have to be funds. And that would be negotiated, I presume, between planning and whomever. But now I'm into a whole different area that I know nothing about. But
that won't be your problem once that happens. That'll be our problem to figure out. So.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Okay, I'm done.
Oh, go ahead, yeah.
What's that?
Go ahead.
Okay, so you were gonna say something?
I was going to, I want to recognize what Morgan said, see if there's anything that you can think of that might need to be added as an amendment to ensure that there is appropriate funding for a study where there is currently no funding. So to think about that. But we can potentially work with the bill sponsor on future amendments as a commission. Since this is actually the first time that we've had an opportunity to have this conversation, and it's a worthwhile conversation to have, and it can be potentially a continued conversation as we work towards the process, the legislative process. And potentially we could entertain a motion from the floor to accept the bill with amendments and the language that would be defined by the Office of Sustainability. Maybe include all the questions that we had here. Whatever Morgan's going to say, we don't have to cut Don King's hair later. And continue to work with the bill sponsor to come up with amendments that work best for the commission and the office. And then look at some analysis of the bill to ensure that we can include sustainable alternatives that might not be a meadow, but might be something else that is more, that gives a little bit of flexibility. Should there be another sustainable alternative that fits within this that is not identified as a meadow as currently identified as a meadow, but could be an option that could be affordable. Hopefully that was slow enough for someone to capture it and play that back.
I mean, that sounds like the great workings of the motion itself. So you didn't officially make it, then I'll make that motion that we capture those amendments. So on scope and scale of the bill, and work with the writer of the bill to make those amendments and vote that we support the bill with said amendments. I guess, and in that process, send our questions and comments meeting over to the council person as well, so we can support those amendments and have a dialogue back and forth on making them before the bill is submitted.
And Mr. Co-Chair, is there anyone that would second that motion?
Second motion.
Is that Ben?
Yep, Ben Zychik seconds the motion.
Thank you, Ben.
Uh,
So all in favor?
yeah, either by show of hands or virtual hands.
Could we do
Aye.
a roll call? Just, it's a lot easier to capture with the roll call because the raised hands don't get captured.
Perfect.
Mia Blom, yes.
Jared Lyles, yes.
Lisa Ferretto, yes.
Brian Smith,
Donzo.
yes.
Donzo Brown, yes.
Morgan
Nicolette
Road,
Lewis
yes.
Saint, yes. Nicolette Lewis Saint, yes.
Phil Costa, yes.
Ben Zychik, yes.
I don't think I heard a vote from Morgan.
I'm sorry, I said yes.
So that seems to be unanimous from the members present.
Right. I guess there's none opposed. Brian, I see your hand up. Did you have a comment, or is that just for voting?
Nope, I was just voting. Sorry.
Okay. All right. Okay. So perfect. So I guess our vote is to accept, but with comments, and we're going to work with the council person to have those comments hopefully reflected in the bill. I guess our next steps will be to consolidate those and to send them to the commissioners as well as the councilmen before the Wednesday deadline. Yeah, well, thanks everyone for making this special meeting. And I guess we'll talk afterwards to make sure everyone's comments are captured. Send those. Is this meeting being recorded, FYI? It is, okay. So yeah, we can capture those comments and send them over to the councilman. Let you all know from there how things go. The vote on Wednesday.
Thank you all for being a part of this process. This is the first time that the commission has received such substantial legislation to weigh in on. So congratulations on this fun legislative duty. So thank you all and have a great night.